Top 10 gemstones that made collectors go bankrupt. They weren't scams. They weren't synthetic. And in most cases, they were precisely what the certificates said they were. So how did thousands of collectors lose everything? Over the last 30 years, a different kind of gemstone crisis has emerged. Not driven by fakes, but by structural failure. Stones that were real but unsellable, certified but unwanted, traded heavily yet misunderstood by the very market they relied on. This isn't a story of greed, it's a story of what happens when beauty, geology, and belief outpace infrastructure. In this documentary, we examine 10 gemstones that created trust, then destroyed it. Not through deception, but through the market's inability to hold what it had once praised. Don't forget to press and hold that like button, leave a comment, and hit subscribe before we begin. Ranked 10th, Color Change Garnet. The modern Alexandrite that cost millions. Not every gemstone deceives on its own. Some are simply misunderstood. But when an entire market agrees on a wrong definition, loss becomes systemic. In 2006, a 4.12 carat color change garnet sold for nearly $18,000 at a Bangkok trade show. It wasn't an Alexandrite. It wasn't part of a rare auction lot, just a garnet, mined in Madagascar, classified by mineralogists as a spessartine Perrotte blend with traces of vanadium and chromium responsible for its unusual optical behavior. At the time, this was celebrated. Forums and trade bulletins referred to it as the modern Alexandrite due to its visible shift from olive green under daylight to reddish pink under incandescent light. But critically, this resemblance was only visual. No lab-based spectral analysis ever equated its optical structure to that of genuine Alexandrite. Still, commercial momentum didn't wait for peer review. Wholesale networks and online dealers began listing these garnets with marketing phrases like full spectrum shift, Alexandrite-type garnet, and garnet hybrid. None of these terms appear in peer-reviewed gemology literature. By the late 2000s, color change garnets were being acquired by small collectors at prices ranging from $1,500 to $4,000 per carat, far exceeding their intrinsic value. As gem labs like GIA and AGL released independent findings, it became clear the color change wasn't stable across sources. Some stones were lightly heat-treated without disclosure. The market narrative had outpaced the science. Prices dropped sharply between 2008 and 2010. Major auction houses stopped accepting stones unless they demonstrated a powerful color change. For thousands of private collectors, this shift came too late. Without liquidity, resale value, or certification alignment, their holdings became functionally obsolete. There was no scandal, no fraud charges, no headlines, just a quiet collapse, multiplied across hundreds of portfolios. Today, color change garnet is still mined, still sold, and still beautiful. However, it is no longer viewed as an investment vehicle. Its story remains a case study in how expectation, not rarity, creates market value, and how misalignment between the two leads to silent financial ruin. Ranked 9th, Black Star Sapphire, Thailand. When belief outpriced reality. Some gemstones collapsed because the facts changed. This one collapsed because the story surrounding it stopped holding up. Worn by emperors, blessed by monks, guided by celestial light. That's how the 1982 Bangkok Gem Fair described the Black Star Sapphire. A stone sold not for what it was, but for what it was imagined to be. What collectors bought was corundum, opaque, often black, cut flat to reveal a six-pointed star, created not by cosmic alignment, but by rudal silk, microscopic needles frozen in a fixed direction. When hit by a single beam of light, these inclusions scatter reflection along predetermined axes. The result isn't rare. It isn't spiritual. It's physics. But the illusion worked. From the 1960s through the early 1990s, Thai dealers flooded global gem shows with trays of star sapphires, each paired with a narrative more potent than its chemical makeup. They were marketed as Eastern talismans, the destiny stones, and gems of unseen protection. The aesthetic helped. Their deep black body color masked flaws, and the star gave them the aura of something meaningful, even if the material was industrial grade. Prices responded accordingly. By the mid-1980s, stones with decent symmetry and strong asterism routinely fetched over $1,000 apiece, not because of intrinsic value, but because belief inflated demand. And then came the dilution. To meet global appetite, the market turned to enhancements and outright fabrication. Some stones were filled with glass to improve clarity. Others were diffusion treated to darken the color or sharpen the star. Still others weren't sapphire at all. Lab-grown corundum with artificial asterism passed off as natural. Parcel schemes became common. One genuine specimen was used to validate a set of 9. No lawsuits, no exposés, just quiet disillusionment. Collectors who had bought items for spiritual symbolism or aesthetic prestige began to discover they couldn't resell them. Not at auctions, not at trade shows, not even to other collectors. By the late 2000s, most gemological labs had ceased issuing premium reports for the category. Black star sapphires from Thailand, once highly regarded, were now classified as decorative grade. Resale prices dropped to under $50 per carat. In private holdings, they became unsellable. And yet the stones themselves had not changed. What changed was how long the story could be believed to be true. Ranked 8th, Tanzanite, the scarcity belief that outlived the stone. One generation, one mine, one chance. Between 2003 and 2007, that phrase was repeated so consistently across catalogs, conferences, trade shows, and storefronts that it began to sound like more than just a sales pitch. It became market law. Tanzanite wasn't new. It had been known since 1967, but now it had a narrative, a limited supply, a geologic clock ticking toward extinction, and a global investor class finally paying attention. It was no longer just a gemstone, it was an asset wrapped in urgency. Dealers carried charts showing annual appreciation. Retail training emphasized buy now or regret later. Some called it the last blue gem humanity will ever mine. Tanzanite 1, the largest mine operator in Maryland, published grading systems, created site holder programs, and backed supply chain confidence. The stone was given structure, and structure made it investable. No one verified the core claim. Not the collectors, not the journalists, not the brokers selling it by the lot. There was no independent exhaustion model, no timestamp on mine viability, but belief scaled faster than supply. And in speculative markets, belief is liquidity until it isn't. The Maryland mine never closed. There were interruptions, including brief export restrictions, perimeter insecurity, and debates over licensing. But mining continued. Stones kept coming. The one-generation prophecy remained unfulfilled. But the market didn't adjust. It was 2008 that did the adjusting. The global economy contracted. Jewelry demand froze. And while Tanzanite supply wasn't increasing significantly, it wasn't vanishing either. Prices stalled, then reversed. Stones bought at $1,200 per carat were being quoted at $400. By 2009, mid-tier collectors had realized that there was no mechanism for selling their collections. No secondary market, no structured exit. They had invested in an idea, not a commodity. There were no court cases, no exposés, no public outcry, just private silence. Thousands of carats are stored in velvet-lined boxes, dozens of outdated portfolio spreadsheets. Collectors were waiting for a rebound that never came, because the value wasn't just in the stone, it was in the consensus that it was about to disappear. When that vanished, so did the price. Tanzanite is still beautiful, still sought after, still used in fine jewelry. But it's no longer chased, no longer forecasted, and no longer hyped. Its legacy isn't fraud, it's expectation left unmanaged. And for many who bought during the 5 years of optimism, it became a lesson in what happens when an entire industry leans on scarcity, without proof. Ranked 7th, Alexandrite. When origin became everything. Some gemstones aren't counterfeits. They're real, just not the right kind. And when price is tied to legacy, even slight differences can cost everything. Alexandrite, certified natural, color change from bluish green to purplish red. Origin, Sri Lanka. To the untrained eye, and even to many trained ones, this report appears to be good news. The stone is genuine, the effect is visible, the color shift is documented, but there's a missing line, one that, had it been present, would have increased the stone's value tenfold. It does not say Russia. For over a century, Russian Alexandrite, particularly from the Ural Mountains, who has held unmatched prestige, discovered in the 1830s and named for Tsar Alexander II, it was favored by imperial jewelers and characterized by a color change so dramatic it bordered on visual contradiction. Green in daylight, red under incandescent light. But that source was exhausted. By the early 20th century, fine Russian material was no longer commercially available. What followed wasn't fraud, it was substitution. Alexandrite from Sri Lanka, Brazil, India, and Tanzania began appearing on the market. These stones showed color change, yes, but often less saturated, less crisp, more subtle. In technical terms, many shifted from greenish-brown to pinkish-purple. Not red, not emerald green, not the kind that earned the original its reputation. Still, prices were guided by the Russian myth. By the early 2000s, fine non-Russian Alexandrite was being priced at $5,000 to $10,000 per carat, in line with depleted Ural stones. Major auction houses accepted them. Retailers highlighted the color change phenomenon. Certification reports stated only Alexandrite, rarely specifying the source unless it was explicitly tested. Buyers assumed equivalence. They weren't told otherwise. Then came the market correction. Specialist gemologists, from GIA to Gubelin, began distinguishing between Russian and non-Russian stones more aggressively. Auction catalogs adjusted descriptions. Collectors who had paid premiums for Brazilian or Indian Alexandrite were now holding assets with secondary tier value. Resale offers plummeted. Dealers began pricing origin. Russian stones held their value, often increasing in value. Non-Russian stones, even with good color change, lost 40 to 70% of their prior valuations. And since many had been purchased under the assumption of long-term appreciation, the losses weren't just financial, they were structural. The belief that Alexandrite is no longer held. Today, the distinction is absolute. Russian origin commands the highest tier. Everything else, however beautiful, is valued within its submarket. The stones didn't change. The certifications didn't lie. But the myth, once universal, now had footnotes, and those footnotes devalued an entire generation of collections. Ranked 6th, Jeremejevite, rarest, real, and financially ruinous. Some collectors didn't chase fame or trend, they chased rarity, the kind that makes even dealers pause and labs issue quiet respect, and yet they still lost everything. In 2005, a 2.9-carat Jeremejevite from Namibia was offered at $85,000. It was untreated, eye clean, near colorless with an aquamarine hue. The certificate from Gubelin described it as extraordinary, citing its crystallographic class, orthorhombic system, and complete absence of commercial synthesis. The stone was real. The price was real. The problem was, the market wasn't. Jeremejevite is a barite mineral discovered in the late 1800s in Siberia. Its defining traits? Found in micro quantities in only 3 locations on Earth, rarely clean enough to facet, rarely larger than 1 carat, chemically stable, but unremarkable in appearance to the general public. To gemologists, it was a marvel. To auction houses, it was inconvenient. Because while Jeremejevite topped many rarest gemstones lists, it lacked an ecosystem. No historical jewelry usage, no marketing machine, no collector base beyond a dozen mineral specialists. And that didn't stop the belief from spreading. Between 2003 and 2012, private collectors, particularly in Tokyo, New York, and Geneva, began quietly acquiring Jeremejevite specimens over 1 carat. They believed rationally that with its global supply under 50 known cuttable pieces, prices would eventually rise. Scarcity had to be enough, but scarcity isn't value unless it has a buyer. By 2015, the illusion had calcified. Collectors holding $50,000 to $150,000 in Jeremejevite inventory found themselves unable to liquidate their holdings. No auction house wanted them. Too unknown. No retailer could list them. Too rare to explain. And no central gem lab was issuing pricing support because there was no data to reference. Even the few stones that re-entered the market came back at a discount of 60 to 80%, often sold quietly between dealers, and each time one sold below cost, it weakened the valuation of every other collector still holding one. There was no crash, no scandal, just an absence of demand long enough to drain all value. Jeremejevite was never misrepresented. It was precisely what it claimed to be: rare, real, respected. However, it was never in demand by the market, and that is how collectors lost. Ranked fifth, blue obsidian, the stone that wasn't a stone at all. Not every loss begins with greed. Sometimes it begins with a label. One word on a tray that was never verified. Volcanic blue obsidian. Natural, high energy, hand-mined. Those were the words used at gem shows from Hong Kong to Denver between 2005 and 2015. The stones were translucent, vivid, and saturated with a sky blue hue, something rarely seen in nature and never documented in volcanology. But the price seemed right: $300 per piece, $2,000 for a matched parcel. Buyers were told it was from deep caves in Mexico or a secret site in Madagascar. Some were told it was spiritual. Others were told it was rare. No one was told it was factory-made. Blue obsidian, in actual geological terms, doesn't exist in saturated transparent blue. Natural obsidian, a volcanic glass formed from felsic lava, appears black, brown, greenish, or smoky. Occasionally, inclusions cause rainbow effects, but never clean, jewel-grade cyan. That effect can only be achieved by industrial silica melting with cobalt or copper-based additives for color. By 2011, lab tests from the University of Tokyo and GIA revealed that nearly all blue obsidian on the gem circuit was chemically indistinguishable from ordinary bottle glass. Refractive index matched glass. Bubble patterns were artificial. UV fluorescence was absent. These weren't just enhanced stones. They were not gemstones at all. And yet, they had been sold that way in bulk. Collectors across North America and East Asia began reporting losses. Not theft, not damage, just one realization. The items they'd bought, believing they were rare volcanic relics, were worth nothing. There were no warranties, no disclosure paperwork. In many cases, the sellers had vanished. Hobbyist dealers, cash transactions, no institutional ties. Gemstone forums from 2012 onward began referring to blue obsidian as the gateway fake, a first mistake that cost $5,000, then taught painful lessons. Even today, dozens of collector-grade cabinets across Europe and Asia still house blue stones labeled as obsidian, privately acknowledged but never resold. The damage was done not by what the material was, but by what it was allowed to be believed. Ranked fourth, Paraíba Tourmaline, the real stone that became untouchable. Before 2005, every copper-bearing blue tourmaline traced back to a single region in Brazil. Certified stones were few. Origins were clear. Value was consistent. Then the geography shifted and the trade lost control of the name. In 2003, a collector in Japan paid $240,000 for a 7.5-carat neon blue tourmaline. Certified Paraíba, GIA report, copper-bearing, vivid saturation. The seller, reputable. The stone, stunning. The problem wouldn't appear for 6 more years. Paraíba Tourmaline, named after the Brazilian state where it was first discovered in the late 1980s, redefined color in the gemstone world. Its glow wasn't a marketing term, it was literal. Caused by the copper and manganese content in lithium-rich tourmaline, the stone emitted an electric, often phosphorescent, blue or green light, unlike anything else. By the early 2000s, demand surged. Prices reached $30,000 per carat for stones over 3 carats. Collectors scrambled. Auction houses began using Paraíba as a keyword even when the origin wasn't confirmed. Then came Nigeria. Between 2005 and 2009, an influx of copper-bearing tourmaline from Africa entered the global market, indistinguishable in color, composition, and lab testing from Brazilian stones. Dealers began using the term Paraíba type, but buyers often still heard one word, Paraíba. Worse followed. Heat-treated and diffusion-enhanced stones began flooding trade shows. Some sellers mixed synthetic copper-bearing tourmaline into parcels. Certificates varied. Some labs reported chemical presence only. Others tried origin tracing, but inclusions overlapped. Most buyers didn't know the difference. By 2010, dozens of collectors realized they could no longer resell their collections. Auction houses rejected stones bought at peak prices due to uncertain origin. Others were discounted 70 to 90% because they lacked documentation from a narrow window when labs were still issuing confident reports of Brazilian origin. Several lawsuits were filed in Japan, Germany, and Thailand. Not over fakes, but over what could no longer be proven. The stones were beautiful. The chemistry was real. But the label had collapsed. For collectors, this was worse than fraud. They had paid for real material and still lost everything. Today, Paraíba Tourmaline remains one of the most desirable stones in high jewelry. However, for individual collectors, unless the origin is unimpeachable and the documentation predates 2008, resale is nearly impossible. In a market built on certainty, uncertainty became a silent bankrupting force. Ranked third, Red Beryl. When too rare to fail, failed. Between 2005 and 2015, Red Beryl was sold as the pinnacle of American mineral rarity and priced accordingly. But what collectors didn't realize was this: the supply was finite, but so was the demand. Red Beryl, also known as Bixbyte, is 1,000 times rarer than diamond. Found only in the Wawa Mountains of Utah, it forms in topaz-bearing rhyolite, under particular geologic conditions involving beryllium-rich fluids and manganese chromophores. Most crystals are microscopic. Less than 1 in 150,000 is gem quality. Fewer still reach a carat. When they do, they glow. A ruby-like red, but optically cleaner, lighter, with pleochroic undertones that shift with angle. From a mineralogical standpoint, Red Beryl is extraordinary. From a collector's standpoint, it was a trap. Between 2002 and 2015, Red Beryl became the darling of boutique investors. Private dealers marketed it as the last true American gemstone, highlighting its closed-source supply and the fact that every known carat originated from a single, controlled region. Supply was traceable. Certificates were consistent. Prices rose fast. By 2010, prices exceeded $15,000 per carat for clean, faceted stones. By 2012, it was no longer unusual to see a 2-carat specimen listed for over $50,000. Collectors were told, only 60 years of production exist. Once it's gone, it's over. And they believed it, because geologically, it was true. But demand didn't scale with rarity. Red Beryl had no history in royal jewelry, no cultural identity outside gemology circles. Auction houses struggled to place it. It was too rare for mainstream jewelry and too obscure for heritage collectors. Worse, most gems were under 1 carat, making them difficult to set and market beyond scientific prestige. And then came the hoarding. Dealers began holding back supply, waiting for price climbs. Private collectors bought multiple stones, expecting an illiquid commodity to turn liquid by consensus. It didn't. By 2017, cracks appeared. Online platforms failed to move stones priced over $10,000. Auctions relisted unsold lots. Buyers realized that no new collectors were entering the market, only sellers, hoping the next buyer would finally validate the price. Some investors attempted to offload holdings for 30 to 40% below appraised value. Many couldn't sell at all, not because the stones weren't rare, but no one had built a market capable of handling them. Red Beryl was never fake, never treated, and never misrepresented. But for the collectors who paid a premium and waited, it became a perfect paradox. Too rare to ignore, too isolated to escape. Ranked second, Lead glass-filled ruby. When 1,000,000 gems became worth nothing, some gemstones collapsed quietly. This one collapsed across 5 continents, and millions of dollars vanished in less than a year. In 2008, the Bangkok Gem and Jewelry Fair was flooded with rubies. Bright, transparent, vibrant red, labeled as natural rubies from Madagascar and Mozambique. The prices? Shockingly affordable. $300 per carat, $1,200 for a 5-carat stone, $10,000 for a matching set of 10. Dealers, collectors, and jewelers bought quickly. Small-time investors bought parcels, retailers stocked up for holiday runs, and none of them saw it coming. What they were buying wasn't traditional ruby, it was fractured corundum, an ultra-low-grade material that wouldn't usually reach the market. Chemically bonded and optically enhanced with lead-based glass. The process worked like this. The cracked ruby was heated. Molten glass with a high refractive index filled the fractures. Once cooled, the stone looked whole. In light, the glass mimicked ruby brilliance. However, under magnification, it proved to be unstable, both chemically, optically, and structurally. The treatment wasn't new. However, in 2008, it was scaled for the first time. Factories in Chanthaburi, Thailand, produced tens of thousands of stones per month, many of which were not disclosed or labeled vaguely as heated. The result? An artificial surge of ruby supply worldwide. For collectors, it was catastrophic. Private buyers had spent tens of thousands on stones they believed were investment-grade Burmese or African rubies. Appraisal reports, if any, used ambiguous terms. Auction houses didn't yet screen for this treatment. Then the market shifted. GIA and AGL issued formal updates stating that lead glass-filled rubies would no longer be graded as rubies. Retailers pulled stock. Auctions began rejecting entire catalogs. Prices collapsed overnight, not by 20%, but by entire categories. In many cases, what had once been called a 5,000 stone was now unsellable at any price. Across India, the US, Japan, and France, collectors reported full inventory losses. Lawsuits followed. Governments updated import classifications. However, no refund mechanism existed for private buyers, especially those who purchased items in cash at trade shows or through informal deals. For thousands, it was over. Lead glass-filled ruby was never a single scam. It was a structural failure, an industrial illusion that appeared just real enough to justify belief, until no one would touch it again. In first place, Andesine, the stone that made the truth unverifiable. No permits, no geological surveys, no confirmed shipments. Yet for almost 8 years, one of the world's most heavily traded red gemstones was listed as natural and sold as an investment-grade gemstone. Between 2002 and 2008, a Plagio-class feldspar began circulating through gem fairs in Bangkok, Munich, Tucson, and Tokyo. The stones ranged from deep copper red to orange pink, with mild metallic flashes under direct light. The label read, Natural Andesine, Origin, Tibet. The appeal was obvious, a red feldspar with transparency, free from inclusions and enhancement, and allegedly from a remote, newly discovered deposit. Prices accelerated. In 2003, it sold at $300 per carat. By 2006, prices exceeded $1,200 per carat. Select jewelry pieces surpassed $10,000 in auction lots across Europe, and East Asia collectors followed. So did boutique designers and gemstone investors. Certification labs, lacking contradictory data, labeled the material as natural and untreated. The origin story held, until spectroscopy caught up. In 2008, 3 independent institutions, the GIA, AGL, and SSEF, began issuing anomaly reports. The findings aligned. Stones showed diffusion-treated copper. Structural residues were consistent with lab-based heating. And most critically, no confirmed Tibetan source could be found. No mines, no export records, no verifiable site photography. The story fractured. Dealers deflected, first to Congo, then to Mongolia, then to Madagascar. But in every case, field gemologists found no evidence of relevant deposits. By 2010, The market no longer accepted the material as natural without confirmation of its origin. GIA restricted reporting. A GL withdrew prior identifications. Jewelry houses removed inventory. Auction houses blocked the stone. And thousands of collectors, many with six-figure holdings, found themselves holding gemstones no longer recognized by the very institutions that once validated them. The damage wasn't due to fake stones. It stemmed from the absence of evidence, a systemic void that was exploited by supply chains, unchallenged by institutions, and trusted by buyers. What had been sold as rare, natural, and Tibetan was revealed to be low-grade feldspar, diffusion treated in high-heat facilities, and distributed without geographic traceability. Andesine labradorite was never meant to be a scam, but the moment it reached global trade, without a single confirmed mine, the truth was no longer necessary until the value collapsed and collectors were left alone to explain what they owned. The stones in this list didn't fail because they were worthless. They failed because the market behind them, the systems of valuation, resale, and verification, weren't ready to carry their weight. In each case, the collectors followed logic, certified reports, visual appeal, historical claims, or geological scarcity. But even the right stone, at the wrong time, under the wrong assumptions, becomes a liability. Markets don't collapse because of beauty. They collapse when certainty breaks down, and when it does, it rarely comes back. Let us know which one resonates with you in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more content like this.